industry. So without further ado, Dr. Tom Noel.
Thank you, Rose, and thank all of you for being here. I'm usually speaking to a much less distinguished, smaller crowd than this. And there, once, a guy sitting right where you are, sir, got up to walk out before I even began to talk, before I even opened my mouth. So I went over and I grabbed him, and he threw up on me. So I've learned not to object if any of you want to get out and go. The bathroom is back there. Thank you, sir. Yeah, and do remind me if I wander away from this mic. But we're here today to talk about the saloons, among other things. And in touring all of the 600 saloons in Denver, taking notes on them, I came across some references to a guy named Mark Twain. Are any of you familiar with him? And he gave us one of the best lines. I hope you don't mind if I steal one of your lines this early in the show.
Not too many of them.
I'll just one.
Oh.
And that was, I don't drink, but if the others are, I try to help out. You might try that on your friends. Okay, Rose, and we're all set here. And here's the magnificent South Platte River, which did not impress Mark Twain, the man who wrote Life on the Mississippi. But here it is up around Julesburg, and can you see from the back? Okay. Can you see Long's Peak? And can you see the Arapaho Indians crossing the Platte? There, a famous painting. Good, that helps. Thanks. But I want to introduce you to Mark Twain. We exhumed him especially for this occasion, for you folks, to tell you a little bit more about this mighty South Platte River.
Thank you for inviting me to come here. Yeah, this exhumation process is not something you want to go through too often. Noel keeps calling me back, though. And of course, your councilman wind up paying for it out of the Widows and Orphans Fund, I'm sure, probably. But isn't this nice? It is the kind of vision of what the town elders would like to believe the Platte looks like. I'll get this. I was born in Florida, Missouri, that is. Town of 99 people, and I raised the population to 100. I let anybody from Chicago say, or St. Louis, can't say the same thing. I raised the population by 1%. But as you probably know, I grew up in Hannibal. And I tell you, we grew up on the great river, accustomed to, shall we say, a higher degree of watery grandeur. That magnificent river, rolling its mile wide, tide along shining in the sun. A little bit larger than the rivers you people in Colorado enjoy, I have to say, from what I've seen so far. I was on a overland stage. I was headed for the silver lands of the Nevada Territory. My brother had been appointed secretary to the new governor of the new Nevada territory. And as those things were done back in those days, my brother had worked in the wilds of Missouri for a young senator from Illinois named Lincoln. And this was his reward. And he invited me along, my brother did, not Lincoln, to serve as informally somewhat secretary to him. And I was extremely grateful. My course had been that I had achieved my childhood dream. It was all our dream, all us boys sitting on the bank watching the river, to come in glory as a steamboatman and drive those magnificent calliopes, beautiful, decorated vessels up and down the Mississippi. I love that profession far more than any I have pursued since. But by and by the war came, and commerce on the river ceased, and I was forced to seek other employment. I joined the Confederacy, served for 2 weeks, deserted, and the Confederacy fell. But with the offer from my brother, I was able to move out into the territories away from where, for example, the first Battle of Bull Run was taking place, when we hopped aboard our magnificent swinging stage. It turned out that of the two of us, I was the only one who could afford our fare, which made it rather clear why my brother had graced me with this offer. But it didn't make any difference. Let's see where we are. Oh, Noel loves to put this one up. Here I am, topless. I've never quite understood why he likes this photo so much.
It's
And
the
I
only
can-
one we have of you swimming in the South Platte River.
I see. Yes, I can. It cuts it off just before the mud there. I've always thought that you felt that the fine ladies of Frisco need a little beefcake to go with their beef steak, and those little glasses of whiskey that they secretly consume. I used to wait till the end of my remarks to do this section, but I'm flying low and fast today. And so I'd like to give you a little bit of thoughts on how it is you go about reaching the age of 70 and beyond. Now, it's 111 years since I died, and I'm coming up on my 188th birthday. So I'm operating in some rarefied territory, but some thoughts for you. I have achieved my distinguished age in the usual way by sticking strictly to a scheme of life that would kill anybody else. I've made it a rule to go to bed when there wasn't anybody left to talk to, and to get up when I had to. This has resulted in an unswerving regularity of irregularity. In the matter of diet, I have been persistent in sticking to things that don't agree with each other's company. I have made it a rule, firm, solid rule, never to smoke more than one cigar at a time. An adjunct to that rule is another one, that I do not smoke when asleep. Now, in the matter of drinking, I have no rule about that. As Dr. Noel pointed out, when the others drink, I like to help. But I remain dry by habit and preference. This dryness does not hurt me, but it could easily hurt you, so you let it alone. I do, of course, drink 2 hot scotches every night before bed, but I only do that as a preventative of the toothache. I've never had the toothache. I do not intend to have the toothache. And I've never bought cigars, cheap ones. I'm sorry, I misstated that. I've never smoked expensive cigars, the kind with the little belly bands on them. I always smoked cheap ones. 50 years ago, when I began smoking, they cost me $4 a barrel. But lately my tastes have improved, and now I pay $7. Well, 6 or 7. But that includes the barrel. Um, 10 minutes doesn't leave you much room. And I would like to introduce your next speaker. You know the term shaggy dog story. And its honored place in the history of humor in this country, and particularly with reference to the Western variety of humor, which seeks to have the narrator completely unaware of his situation and the mistakes that he's making, as opposed to the slap on the back, here's a good one kind of thing that you'll hear in the continental places on the East Coast. And so occasionally I'm called to turn about and introduce Dr. Noel for his portion of the proceedings, and it appears that we've found ourselves at that juncture again. So herewith begins what might be called a shaggy camel story. As you travelers in our great and Grand West know, the sagebrush, here we go, shaggy. The sagebrush is very fair fuel for campfires because it puts off very little smoke and therefore no swearing. But as a vegetable, like kale, it is a distinguished failure. Nothing can abide the taste of it but the jackass and his illegitimate son, the mule. But their testimony as to its nutritiousness is worth nothing, for they will eat pine knots, brass filings, steel rods, or kale, or anything that comes handy and go off looking as if they'd had oysters for dinner. Mules and donkeys and camels have appetites that anything will relieve temporarily, but nothing satisfy. In Syria once, at the headwaters of the Jordan River, a camel took charge of my overcoat while the tents were being pitched and examined it with a critical eye, all over, up and down, with as much interest as if he had an idea of getting one made like it for himself. And then, after he was done considering it as an article of apparel, he began to contemplate it as an article of diet. He put his great paw in the center of it, lifted out one of the sleeves with his teeth and chewed at it, gradually taking it in, and all the while opening and closing his great eye in a kind of religious ecstasy, as if he had never tasted anything quite as good as an overcoat before in his life. Then he smacked his lips once or twice and lifted out the other sleeve. Next he tried the velvet collar and smiled a smile of such contentment that it was plain to see that he regarded that as the daintiest part of an overcoat. The tails went next, along with some percussion caps and some cough candy from Constantinople. And then some newspaper correspondence dropped out. And he took a chance on that. Manuscript letters written for the home papers by our good Dr. Noel for the Sunday section of the Rocky Mountain News. But he was treading on dangerous ground now. He began to come across solid wisdom that lay heavy on his stomach. And now, every now and then, he'd take a joke that would rattle his teeth. It was getting to be perilous times for him. But he held his grip with good courage and hopefully, till at last he began to come across statements of fact that not even a camel could swallow with impunity. He began to gag and to gasp, and his eyes to stand out, and his forelegs to spread. And in a quarter of a minute, he fell over, as stiff as a carpenter's workbench, and died a death of terrible agony. Well, I went over to the animal and removed the material from his jaws and was surprised to find that the poor sensitive creature had choked to death on one of the mildest and gentlest statements of fact that ever Dr. Noel put before his trusting public. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Thomas Jacob Noel.
Thank you, Mr. Twain. Don't believe everything he says when you read in a Mark Twain book. And we'll now get back to the saloons of Denver. Oh, you're showing your photo again.
No, that's all right. That's as far as I got.
Here he is as a young steamboat pilot, headed west. Reeve, we'll skip through some of this, unless you want to comment.
No, go ahead.
And here he is, a very handsome, the most popular and thought to be the most handsome man in America. Although he did have trouble with his smoking. And there he is, feeding that animal. my precious manuscript. I don't think I ever recovered that from that camel's stomach. Well, back to saloons, our alleged topic today. This is an old-time saloon in Buckskin Joe. Any of you remember Buckskin Joe? By Canyon City, now gone. The Koch brothers bought it and moved it. Thank you, Rose. This is the old-time saloon there in Buckskin Joe. The Koch brothers bought it and moved it over to Paonia, to their old western town. But there they would have a legendary shootout at noon every day. Now, Frisco isn't doing this yet, are they? Rose, you should do that with a museum, the shootout every day. And then, of course, after the shootout, the winner gets hung. Quicker justice than we see these days. The first tavern I could find in Colorado is in Horace Greeley's book, Beyond the Mississippi. And he kept looking for a decent restaurant like so many New Yorkers do here. And this was all he could find, groceries. And he went in there and discovered all they had was wet goods, no dry goods to be had. The oldest saloon surviving in Denver anyway is this, the 4 Mile House. Have any of you been to that? Great museum in Denver, the oldest structure left in Denver. Here's a painting of it on Cherry Creek. How many miles outside of Denver do you think the 4 Mile House is?
Grant, General Grant.
And here's the inside and the old reconstruction of a saloon. Is my voice coming across in the back? No. You can't turn me up, can you, Rose?
Oh, yeah, I can.
Oh, boy.
Oh.
And here's another tavern still left, the 17 Mile House out in Douglas County has been restored now. It's a great place to visit. See those two huge cottonwoods on either side of the house? Those, according to the local story, mark the grave of people shot and killed in the 17 Mile House. Then you want to dispose of the body. Have any of you figured out how to do that? When you murder your wife or your husband or whatever, you bury them and you plant a cottonwood sapling on top of the grave to explain that freshly turned earth. And of course the body is great bone meal, blood meal, and whatnot for the cottonwoods, which are growing happily to this day. This is on the Adams County, Denver County line. And this is a tavern addressing one of the great problems, perhaps the greatest problem in our country today, and that is the disparity between the rich and the poor. Have any of you ever noticed your difference with Bill Gates or someone like that? This place recycled items. I went in there and found that, are we doing okay, Rose?
Oh, yeah, I'm just fiddling with it.
Thank you. And when I walked in, they said, we've got a sale on. Would you like a diamond ring, wristwatch, transistor radio? And if they get to know you a little better there, they also sell automobiles, television sets, anything you could possibly lose. So if you have lost anything from your residence recently, you might try the Amazingly Low Bar at 5201 Brighton Boulevard on the Denver County, Adams County line. The slide is a little old. The prices have gone up since that. Best known early day saloon keeper was Uncle Dick Wooten. Have any of you been on Wooten, in Wooten, Colorado, or down on Raton Pass? This is the gateway from New Mexico into Colorado. There, he made great Injun whiskey, which was sold to the Indians and was often described as shake me, tanglefoot, or bust head liquor. You've had some of that, I bet, Mr. Twain.
Taos Lightning, I believe.
Is the other name for this, right. And the town was so grateful they helped him build. It's the first two-story home in Denver with a thatched roof and glass pane windows. Uncle Dick Wooten's Western Saloon. Have any of you ever wondered about the antics of the city of Denver? About how much we spend to build a new airport when we had a perfectly feasible one? Other extravagant offenses. keeping to build a new football stadium anytime the owner wants it. Well, this all dates back to the beginning of Denver City. Here it is, the Apollo Hall on Larimer Street, what's now Larimer Square, where the city dads had a few drinks down on the first floor and then went up to the second story to that hall and created the people's government of the city of Denver. Any wild guesses as to the first action of the people's government? I think this might have been true in Frisco and many other towns too. The first action was? No, lynchings. I think taxes were the second law passed. And I did a lot of work trying to track down Judge Lynch, who seems to have worked mostly at night. And usually he was pretty good. He'd leave a little note tacked to the body that said, "This man was hung." So everybody would understand what had happened to this man who was hanging from a cottonwood tree already. He stole horses, he loved Indians, whatever his crime was announced there. This was also, as the flyer there says, the first theater in Colorado, the Apollo Hall, where they actually did Shakespeare in the early days. I hope we're going backwards. Here's that lynching. And can you guess what his last request was from this drawing? Which Pimster Proctor, who was there, actually drew up this drawing of it. Can you see his face? Can you see a cloud in front of his mouth? Yes. His last request was not for a prayer, not to send a letter to his mumsy, but for one last smoke before he was, as the Rocky Mountain News put it, jerked to Jesus. I thought that was fairly kind. That's from the Larimer Street Bridge. The late, great Dennis Gallagher gave me this picture of his grandfather's saloon. It's hard to find pictures of the interior of saloons, but outsides are much more common. And Councilman Madden, who owned this, called it Madden's Wet Goods, so no one would mistake it for dry goods. And from there, he ran the first ward in Denver, the Auraria neighborhood. And I interviewed some of his descendants, including a Catholic priest and nuns. They're reliable sources, aren't they? Usually. Anyway, they told me that he was a great councilman. He was councilman from 1975, I think it was, until his death. In those days, there was no term limits. And he was loved in the neighborhood because he would walk every block in the ward, kissing babies, giving candy to the ladies, getting your worthless son a job with the city of Denver. And he also apparently took in the homeless. I found at this little address on Larimer Street, there were 115 registered Democrats living in the back of this tiny little saloon. So apparently he took in the homeless and solved their needs. Here's a map of the saloons of Denver around 1880. You can see how many there were. There were often 4 on one street corner. One place, an Irish place, advertised, "Come on in, boys. If you don't see a fight in half an hour, you get a free beer." If you compared this with a map of the Lodo neighborhood today in the ballpark, there'd be about as many saloons then as there are now. A student of mine gave me this great photo of a drawing in a German magazine, which was talking about the great time that Germans could have in the new country, wearing cowboy hats, playing poker, and enjoying themselves. And there's more to this story. Germans were 1/3 of all the foreign-born immigrants coming into Colorado. How many of you have German ancestry? That's about right. And many of them were fleeing the old country where Prussia was constantly fighting with Poland and France and its neighbors to try out the New World, where they did very well. They actually had more average income, according to the census, than any other group, including the Scots and the British. The oldest ethnic club in Colorado, the Turnverein here in Denver, a German club where you could go to speak German, read German newspapers, hear German music, and nowadays get a free, cheap charter flight to Germany. This is 15th and Blake Street in downtown Denver, and I've highlighted there for you the only tree left probably in the whole city. This was a German beer gardens where Grandma was welcome, the kids were welcome. It was a very wholesome, great place to spend time. And that one tree there may be the last one left in this beer garden. Some of these beer gardens became quite elaborate. Like this one. How many of you have been to Elitch's? Good. If you haven't been there, not to go to Elitch's is not to know Denver. The first brewery in Colorado, the Rocky Mountain Brewery, over in North Denver. Here you see it. And that grew into a huge brewery, the Zhang Brewing Company, the largest pre-Prohibition brewery in town, larger than Coors or any of the others. Let's see. Yeah, this is 7th Street here. And this is the Platte River. And this is that huge brewery complex. The house up here is still there if you're driving down I-25 at 7th Street. You can still see the brewmeister's house. But the biggest brewery since Prohibition, of course, is the Adolph Coors Company. And if you've ever been there, you take the tour. You can actually go tour the brewer's family home, the old Coors mansion, not mansion, but large house, which is part of the deluxe tour there, where still some of the family still lives. You're on, of course, Clear Creek. There's the Coors Brewery. And notice the kids. These are little boys, the 6 sons of Adolph Coors, getting a start early. And one of the great advantages of working in a brewery is that during the coffee break at 10:30 or 2:30, you got all the beer you wanted. And that was true up until the 1970s when somebody had too much and ran amok at the state capitol. I think that dog has been drinking, hasn't it? And ladies, this is how you keep your fine figure, drinking only Coors beer. German breweries all over the state, Bavarian House, Berlin House, German House. This is the German House in Boulder. Can you see that? Not in the back. Can you hear in the back now?
If you speak into the microphone, it's much easier to hear you.
Thank you. I will try that. The Mac Brewery up above Central City, now restored, I think, as condos. Buddy Schmaltz, the owner, creator of what was an old bordello, now a brew pub. Silverton. Nearly every little town seems to have its own brewery, brew pub this day. How many are there in Frisco, Rose?
2.
No.
There's more than that you've seen?
Yeah. More than 2. 7.
7. Were you sober when you were doing this count? So.
Part of the time.
At the beginning.
And here's the old Silverton Brewery torn apart for the space for the statue of Christ of the Mines, who's praying that mining days will come back to Silverton. Isn't that a happy sight? This is the Walder's Brewery in Pueblo, which has just been reopened, as I understand it, by an energetic young couple, serving once again Walder's beer. How many of you have drunk that? Good for you, sir. I think I saw you in there. And a big deal with the Germans, of course, especially during World War I and II, was to prove that they were 100% American. So their floats are going to boast things like that. Here's the Schneider Brewery in Telluride, Schneider Brewery in Trinidad. It too is reopening, just as the great Tivoli is reopened in Denver. Here you see it, the highlight of the CU Denver campus. And what are these? How many of you remember these? Foam scrapers. Remember when you have too much foam on your beer? That's what you use these for. Some of you thought you'd learn nothing today. Who is that guy? Right. Governor, senator. In his early days getting started with the Wynkoop Brewing Company, the first of what are now something over 400 different brew pubs and craft breweries in Colorado. And helped kick-start the rejuvenation of Wynkoop Street and lower downtown Denver. For the ethnic groups, these saloons were particularly important. This is one case, the Italians. And I interviewed the daughter of Cyril Mangini years ago, and she was quite elderly then. And she said her father thought long and hard about one Italian name that Denverites, Coloradans, would not throw rocks at. And he came up with the name Colorado Columbus. She didn't live long enough to see what's happened to Christopher Columbus since then. But this will be like a visit to the old country where you'd find olive oil and Italian food, Italian drinks. Here it is, it's still there, 2219 Larimer Street. But last I was there, it was a yoga parlor, which is what's happening to gentrification in Denver. What was Skid Row are now yoga parlors. Here's Cyril Mangini. These folks were dark complected, spoke a different language, had a different religion, and ate different food. So there was considered persecution against Italians. They suffered much of that in the early days in Colorado. How many of you can see a white cross here over the door? A little hard to see. Another white cross over here, and a clock right there. Who owns this bar? A guy named Florian Spaldi, who was the first Swiss immigrant into Colorado. And he made his way the way typically Americans do, rising up the ladder, a Horatio Alger story. At first he's a drayman going up into the mountains, cutting down wood, bringing it in, selling firewood in Denver. He finds coal in a place still called Coal Creek, begins mining that. And then he rents out a little saloon on this corner, 17th and Blake in Lodo. And from there it rises through the city directories and records of his occupation. He has a saloon there. In 1876, he buys that property from the owner, opens his own saloon and a bakery. And then on top, you can see there the Centennial Hotel dating back to 1876. I kept trying to follow him through the city directories, and the city director compiler finally gives up and just lists him as Florian Spaldi, real estate, business, capitalist, because you can't list all of those enterprises in the few lines he's given there. And my guess is that he wrote back to Switzerland and said, we need immigrants here, we need somebody who can fix my watch. And so he gets people started in the watchmaking business. Sorry, this doesn't show up clearer there, but that is a watch. And this would be the Swiss Immigrant Committee, not a large population, but one of the many immigrant groups in Denver, many of whom use saloons as their starting point. And then you have this old bitch. Can you see the witch there? Who is that ugly woman? You recognize her? Who is that? She's the only woman there. Yeah, Carrie Nation. And she is teaching those little kids, your children, to sing, Who Are We, the Little WCTU, the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Who are we, the WCTU? When we grow, we will vote, and the saloons will go. That actually happened in Colorado ahead of national prohibition. As of January 1, 1916, you couldn't legally buy booze in Denver. See that spittoon? And you see how many people have missed it? Have any of you ever been around people in bars that think their aim was good? And they spit the spittoon, and there are actually stories of these spittoons floating out on little brown puddles. Breckenridge. Muriel Wally did great drawings of places like the Gold Pan Saloon. I trust none of you are associated with the Gold Pan Saloon in Breckenridge, which harbors locals and did not encourage tourists. And it's still called the Gold Pan. The interior has changed very little since Muriel Wally. How many of you know her? Wonderful writer. Get her book, Stampede to Timberline, with her artwork drawings of ghost towns, and many in Summit County. The pool table is still there. The Gold Pan is still there over the back bar. Anyone recognize this? You're in Frisco. How are they doing? Still thriving?
Yeah. Sir,
Yes.
I owe an apology to Rose. You're right, there are two
In Frisco.
in Frisco. What I was talking about was the county. Some people argue it was 7, some argue 8. But anyway,
Tom,
two in Frisco. You were correct.
One step to your left.
Okay.
It's gone.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, an honest man. Father Dyer, I trust you all know about this great Summit County preacher who lectured in saloon halls because that's where the people would be. And I want to close with this one, which I'm sorry is gone, but Angel's Rest used to be a great saloon here. Anybody remember that one? Thank you.